Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. You must be Chris.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm assuming from the video I watched.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So I can kind of jump around, try to focus more on things that you, from what I could see, you couldn't really talked about very much before.
Okay.
I'm going to start from the beginning and ask when you did move down to LA, what was the first job that got you into SAG?
Well, at that time there were two different unions. So there was SAG and there was AFTRA. And the get and and the typical way that voice talent would try to get into SAG, which was what we would call a closed union, meaning you had to you had to work on a SAG contract to get into SAG, right? It's chicken or the egg,
Mhm.
as it were. The way that most voice talent would go about it is they join AFTRA, excuse me, which was an open union, and then you'd book if you book a principal role, which included anything voiceover beyond loop groups or walla or background voices, additional voices, anything other than additional voices. So if you book a radio commercial, if you book a promo spot, if you book an animated series, if you book whatever, you were then eligible 1 year later to join SAG as part of their sister union agreement. So that's how I got in. I booked a Burger King commercial on radio under an AFTRA contract, and then jumped in and joined SAG when I got the chance. From there, I think I joined SAG way before I ever worked a SAG contract. And then I think my first contracts were for SAG were under, if I'm not mistaken, they were like for doing a loop group, which is the people who go in and fill in the background voices
Right.
for extras on a film shoot.
Well, I was gonna guess maybe it would have been the Ants video game.
I don't know why I'm credited with that, but I do not remember ever recording the Ants video game. I don't think
Okay.
that's my credit. The first gig I ever booked in Los Angeles of note was I booked two video games. One of them was Kessen 3,
Right. Yeah.
and I played Nobunaga in that, and I literally had like one line, and it was just to picture, and that was it. And then the other one I did World Series of Poker, and I did like I don't know what year that was. That must have been 2005 or something. And I did several characters on that World Series of Poker. And like one of them was my like Chandler guy from the 90s, like this. And then, one of them was like a bro. He was like a bro down here. That was fun.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, sometimes IMDb makes me crazy because it's great. It's a great repository and it has things that I do remember doing but forgot that I had done, like
Right.
various different anime projects. It's great to refer to and go, oh, yeah, I was in that and I did play those characters. And other times there's just like some credits on there that, sorry, that's not me.
Right.
Like I'm credited with something right now on Pokemon Masters EX, and I have, to my knowledge, never worked. I mean, unless it was like codenamed something else. I've never worked on a Pokemon project, not one time.
Oh.
But I've
Okay.
got fans coming to me and going, "You were on Pokemon," and I'm like, "Sure, sure,
Yeah.
I was." But I appreciate the deep dive. Thank you for that. Actually, my first major gig was I mean, besides the gigs that I just told you about, those like non-union video games before I joined the union when I got to Los Angeles, my first major union gig outside of that one Burger King commercial was doing the video game for Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness. Now, or excuse me, Kung Fu Panda the first film. That I was literally in and legitimately is a credit of mine. And
Mhm.
that was my first major, foray into voice acting and voice matching.
Right. I know that you've been asked like everything you could be asked about that, but for anyone that doesn't know, like how if is it pretty involved to become a voice match for somebody?
Well, I was just doing a webinar this morning,
Yeah.
and they asked me a similar question, and the question is a valid one. Like I typically, because I do teach and I do coach, I try to be very specific about what I feel like I'm a good teacher at and sticking to those areas. And typically I don't teach voice match because even though I do it, I found that I've done it over the years more instinctually and done it by my ear rather than um, done it in any sort of systematic way that I could than help somebody replicate. What I will say is it is a different. There's a different standard of credibility for voice matching. So I usually say it this way, like there are impressions. We do impressions. Most of us have impressions of people that we've done, whether they're people that we've seen like Peter Griffin or Homer Simpson in the media, or, you know, famous celebrities, or they are our own family, friends, parents, whatever. Like we know how to impersonate people.
Right.
But when you're voice matching, your impersonation, your portrayal of their sound has to be so exact that it is seamless for an audience member, that it's seamless for someone to walk into a movie theater or sit down in front of their television and listen to a whole show and not know where you came in. And that requires a way different standard of like specificity. So for me, what I have learned to start articulating and helping people with in terms of voice matching is it's important to learn about the person that you're trying to match, where their voice sits. Then you also learn how they form their words. So like for the difference between me and Jack Black, we basically have very similar instruments. I was liking it to being in an orchestra, right? Like I'm in the brass section of the orchestra. I'm like a trombone. And Jack is like, you know, he's like a French horn or another instrument that's got a little bit more bass than I do, but is in that same section of the orchestra. Whereas somebody like a Steve Buscemi is in the strings section. So it's not as easy for me to do Steve Buscemi as it is Jack Black because we're in the same section of the orchestra. Mm-hmm. Like a trombone, you play it the right way and you can almost get it to sound like a French horn. But you'll be really hard pressed to get that trombone to sound like a viola, right? Mm-hmm. Or a violin. So what I've tried to teach people is, you know, try to stick to voices that are close to yours already, in the same section of the orchestra at least. And then, so they have the same kind of pitch and quality, brassy tone or smoothness or texture. And then from there, pay attention to where the resonance sits. So like when I do Robert Downey Jr., I tend to be like what we would call like a D nasal. I'm like articulating right up here underneath my nostril passages because he speaks from there. And that's where I'm sending the resonance from my voice. And then I do that lilting thing that he does when he's trying to make a point, and he will pause for no reason. So those factors all together make that voice match. Whereas the difference between Jack Black and I is really just articulation. I don't change my pitch at all. I am now because we're both older and his voice has been, I think, ridden a little harder than mine has. Mm-hmm. So I have to go lower. You guys have to go lower in my register now to match Jack. But originally it was just this. It was just articulation. I wouldn't change pitch or texture or anything else. I would just form my words with my articulators differently. So for me, talking like me sounds like this. But when I'm doing Jack, I kind of flatten out all the sounds like that. You see what I'm saying? And then I also do some funky things with like being very particular with the sounds to emulate his comedy bits and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then it just becomes, but there's still elements of that I just picked up by ear that I wouldn't know how to articulate. And judging on how to go into his routine. So I like I said, I'm only barely scratching the surface of teaching voice match. It's very difficult to teach. Right. But that's where I would start. If anybody is looking to find out who they voice match, record your own voice and listen back to it later and then say, who does that sound like? And if nobody comes to mind, that's okay. Just wait it out, because there is a huge cadre of voices in our media saturated world, whether they're in Hollywood dramas or cartoons or they're news personalities. You sound like someone. Mm-hmm. I guarantee it. It's just a matter of figuring out which one.
And that does make me think to ask, just generally with voiceover so far, what is the case where you've had to alter your voice the most for a role?
Wow, that's a really good question. These are good questions, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
The most difficult voice match or the most different from mine. Huh. That's a really hard one because typically I don't submit on a whole lot of people that don't sound like me. But I will say this. I recently played Heimerdinger in Arcane,
Right.
the new show on Netflix that's based on League of Legends. Hashtag Arcane, go watch it. It's one of the most brilliant cartoons it's not even a cartoon. One of the most brilliant series I've ever had the privilege of being involved with. And Heimerdinger is a little character that is called a Yordle, and they're just these little furry pom-poms of characters. They're kind of like a mix between a furball and a hamster, and a little bit of gerbil in there. But he's cute, he's amazing, and his voice is very reedy up top.
Mm-hmm.
So his voice was up here like this, and I had to, articulate not just in my upper voice, but I also had to come up with how he talks. It's not just the pitch, there's also his articulation and the way that he sees the world. He's a scientist. He's very, very interested in things of science. He knows a lot because he's been around for 300 years and he's very cautious. But he's also game for a good experiment now and then.
And that, I think, is pretty different from me. And definitely was really fun. That's the one that comes to mind from recent memory. I can tell you this. I did all of Jason Statham's fight efforts for Fate of the Furious.
Oh, wow.
Fast and Furious 9? No, it was Fate. Fate of the Furious. Fast and Furious 8. So
Wow.
I was doing all that with this. And that was very different from me. He's got a lot of texture in there. And he has a different way of speaking altogether. And he's from a completely different country.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very out of the box for me. Those are my two examples.
Okay. It's sort of related to that too. One of my signature questions is always asking what is the most, or like what's the darkest, most emotionally involved headspace you've had to get into for a role?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. There are some dark places we get to go. I don't get to go there very often because I'm usually doing kids animation. If I'm not doing Sophia the First or Elena of Avalor or something for juniors where it never gets dark, like there's no shadow in those worlds. In all fairness, those two examples I just gave you are probably the most nuanced and have the most shadow. They have most good versus evil and characters that are more nuanced because the writing team, to their credit, writes way up for the preschool audience, and I have nothing but respect for that. But like when you're doing Doc McStuffins, you don't have to go to I'm a serial killer, right? You don't have to go to that kind of like warped headspace. Video games, you do. I would say one of the darkest that I played, I want to say was Murdered Soul Suspect,
Okay.
where I want to say I was the spirit resonance of a serial killer or a murderer, and that was a dark place. Believe it or not, when I was doing scratch tracking before Jack came in and recorded Kung Fu Panda 2 specifically, that particular chapter in the Kung Fu Panda franchise has a real dark edge to it, and Poe has to really face a sense of defeat that he didn't have to face in the first film, because the first film is all about him starting from a place of defeat and becoming an overcomer. But the second film, it's like he gets taken down a peg, and like I said, they hired me to come in and record before Jack does. That way they can save their money on the celeb and still get takes they can animate to and whatnot until he comes in and replaces everything and gives the final performance. But there were some really dark moments in that, and I remember Jen Yu Nelson, who is the director of the feature. I remember her pushing really hard into dark places of loss for Poe, and even though I'm playing this big, lovable kind of like geek made good in the form of a panda, right? It's like he's like a big stuffed animal. She was really pressing to go to very real dark places of what does it feel like to have lost everything because of your own hubris, your own choices, and how does that sorrow feel when you are when you are looking at the devastation caused by our villain because you were unable to prevent it or unable to fix it. And so that was that kind of cinematic acting that tends to happen in feature film or in adult animation, adult adventure animation, something like Arcane. Arcane is great too. In terms of, I mean, I've already sold it once on your interview here, but that was also another moment where I got to jump into the dark place and the reality, because it is meant to be a gritty drama. It happens to take place in a fantastical world based on the property League of Legends, but it's a story about people,
Right.
and people betraying people, and people rising to an occasion, and people suffering through the law of unintended consequences. And Heimerdinger goes through some very heavy stuff. Like one of the first, and I don't think this is spoiler alert, but one of the first scenes that Heimer's in, one of the other characters proposes using very dangerous tech. And Heimer literally has a flashback to something the equivalent of like nuclear war in World War II or a Nazi concentration camp. Like he has to go to that dark place of, I remember what this kind of tech can do. We're not going there. And I worked with David Lyerly, who was the director of that, the voice director of that, and him just putting me in that dark place of, you watched your whole village get incinerated by out of control technology in the wrong hands. This is the line that you draw, and it needs to come from a real place. And that was pretty heavy. I mean, that's pretty heavy to put yourself in the mindset of somebody who survived a great tragedy like that.
Right.
And I don't mean to belittle anyone's personal tragedy, but there is something that at least I had to stretch to get in touch with about enduring one of those monumental cultural events of that group tragedy, a national tragedy, an international tragedy. And that was really a great acting project. This is a great question because I love talking about the acting of it. That's what makes it fun. Like, this is the fun stuff. Going dark is super fun. And when I coach, like, some of my favorite stuff to dig into with students is, here, work on these sides from the old Walking Dead video game. And I want you to play this person, and the scenes are, here's your establishing scene, and then scene 2 is, you've just lost the most important person in your post-apocalyptic world. Your kid is dead. Now play it. And getting in there and digging, and a lot of that video game sensibility comes through, and it's always fun to watch an actor have a breakthrough. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, that was so... I'm like, yes, that's acting. This isn't voiceover, it's voice acting, and that's what it is. So it's good.
And I'm actually an avid listener of the No Sleep podcast as well. So is there a highlighted story that you've worked on where you've had to get to that same space?
Yeah, I had the great fortune of doing 2 different pieces. I've had the great fortune of being one of their booked leads on a couple of different stories of significance, but the 2 that took the biggest toll on me, the first one was, I want to say it's around the end of season 9 of No Sleep. There's a story called When the Stars Go Out, and I believe it's just a feature story. I don't know if it might be a single story episode is what I'm saying, but it's called When the Stars Go Out, and it's more of a metaphysical tale about love and loss than it is straight horror. And that I had to go to a really dark place because because the story starts with a man losing his beloved in a car wreck. Did you ever hear that story? Did you hear When the Stars Go Out?
Yeah.
Oh, right on. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The other one that was really hard is the season finale from, oh my gosh, was it season 11 or season? I can't remember which season it's in, but it's a single story episode that I know for sure because it was a long episode. Whitefall.
Okay. Yeah.
Whitefall is that was such a draining experience because it takes place over people basically trapped in a void in this bus station, and they run out of food and they're surrounded by snow, and it's a horrible horror story of what people can be reduced to. And it was really emotionally exhausting because I had to be the narrator of that, and so the character from whose perspective the whole story is told. So I not only had to act in scene, but I also had to narrate from, I think the character's name is Chris, from Chris's perspective, like what he's seeing, and the prose. The prose is just beautiful, but it's also haunting. And that story is, I mean, I remember when that story was released, the No Sleep group, everything anybody talked about was the fact that they could not listen to that and not be in tears at the end of it. I'm sure you weren't. I'm sure you were very stoic about it, but I don't know. I don't know you. But just judging from the way you carry yourself, I wouldn't put that on you, but I would say that a lot of people said like that it moved them.
Yeah.
And that had a lot to say about all of the performances in the show, and from the writing itself. The writing is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And really, really great. I want to say CJ Walker. I think that's who wrote it. CJ Walker.
Yeah.
Wrote Whitefall. Such a good story. Oh my gosh. But those are the two darkest. There's been some dark stuff there though, which I actually kind of like. I think we all kind of have a dark side. So, and being an animation actor, I don't get a whole lot of opportunity. I'm getting more and more these days as more gritty action things are being presented that are animated offerings. But I originally started and continue to voice for No Sleep because it's my horror outlet. It's my way to jump in and and explore the dark side in a safe way, have fun. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. This is backtracking and this isn't voiceover related, but I did watch the trailer for it, but I couldn't find the actual short for Dalton's Reward.
Whole game was you get 168 hours. That's 1 week to do everything. To write, shoot, and produce a movie, and that's all you get. And what was fun about Dalton's Reward is I was basically just helping friends, and it's the one thing of like on camera it's not the one thing I've done on camera, but it's the one thing of note that like made it on my IMDb. I think around the same time I had done some extra work on Mad TV as well. I played like a security guard in a Stewart sketch. I don't even remember who the comedian was that did Stewart, the little boy Stewart. But I was the security guard at a candy store, and that was kind of fun.
As Michael McDonald.
I'm sorry?
As Michael McDonald.
Yes, thank you. Michael McDonald did that. Absolutely. Damn, you're quick, man. You got a lot of knowledge. That's great. I love it. But yes, that's my other foray into on camera, and then I realized my passion is voiceover, and I can't do both. Not wholeheartedly anyway, so I still make myself available occasionally, in theory anyway, for on-camera projects, but the things I pursue are all voiceover at this point.
Yeah.
So.
And would the first instance where you had to do like a multitude of incidental characters be in Mass Effect 2?
No, I don't think it is in that offering.
Okay.
But I did have to cover several different characters in that. I want to say the very first time I was basically part of a pitch or a pilot project for somebody wanting to do the animated story of Captain Cook, who, navigated a whole lot of the world and most of the northern hemisphere. There's like Cook's Inlet and Cook's Bay and Cook's Anchorage and all the other bodies of water, Cook's Bathtub, all of those places. And they wanted to do, because it was an epic adventure story set in the 1800s, and they ended up producing like a radio play.
Okay.
Which was, I think, where the project ended. But but it was originally designed as an animation pitch to try to get a series. And I think that was the first time was brought in to do, hey, can you be soldier or sailor number 5? And what do you got for, we need helmsman 3 and we need indigenous islander 6 over here. And I think that was the first time I was brought in to do ancillaries. And then Mass Effect was the first major market one for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I know I'll also get in trouble if I don't mention this. There was an independent producer around that same time named Darian Sewell, who also hired me to do. He was dramatizing Bible stories for kids, and I played I don't know, I want to say 10 to 12 different characters for him, and that, along with Captain Cook, those were the two utility experiences I had before hitting major market stuff. But yeah, I got the best line in all of Mass Effect 2, which is, if you fire this rocket, there will be nothing to stop it. That is why Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a bitch in space. Do you understand? I'd be hard-pressed to find it in the game at this point, but I know it's there because I saw years ago, I did see a clip of it on a YouTube channel.
Okay.
So it's there somewhere. I think I'm totally background. But on that project, I also played a scientist who was recording his journal and, finding his scientific findings about the virus or the alien life form or whatever. So that was kind of fun.
And so what was the first anime project that you worked on?
What do you consider anime? Just animated series, or do you include localization of video games as well, of Japanese anime video games?
Yeah, both.
Probably Kessen 3. But I have a different answer for the first time I got in and really dug in on something that was a localization was part of the Tales series, and I couldn't tell you which one.
Okay.
I don't think it's Xenia. It might be Symphonia? Tales of Symphonia? But I played a couple of characters, and again, background, ancillary, covering some things in that, and that was my first anime property in terms of video games. But then in terms of series, I did 2 episodes as Star-Lord in the Marvel series Disc Wars. When I started recording Avengers Assemble, after I booked the role of Iron Man for Western United States animation for Marvel, they invited me to reprise the role for Marvel Future Avengers, which you can watch on Disney Plus right now. And it's a 3-season anime where they take some Shoto heroes, stick them in the Avengers with your usual gang of idiots, and they have anime-style adventures with anime versions of not just the heroes, but many of the classic Marvel villains, Red Skull, MODOK, all that kind of stuff. And that series was what I really cut my teeth on dubbing.
Okay.
I had done Disc Wars, but it was really that series where I learned the skill of dubbing and realized how hard it was. There's this weird thing in Hollywood, man, where dubbing actors are relegated to what is seen as bottom of the barrel work. This is you're just covering somebody else's performance.
Yeah.
You're not even doing anything original. And so it's usually bottom pay rates. Much of it is not union content. Marvel Future Avengers was, because it was Disney owned, but much of it isn't. And you're making pennies on the dollar to what you'd be making if you were voicing an original character in a kid's show for Western TV. But when you actually get into it, it is a specialized skill that not everybody can do.
Mm-hmm.
And after my first 3 sessions, not even 3, it was probably even after my first session doing Future Avengers, I was I have a whole new level of respect for the people who've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Because my director was long-term dubbing legend and voice actor Kirk Thornton, who's a wonderful guy to work with. And if you have not interviewed Kirk, try to track him down, because I'm sure he's got fantastic stories.
I did back in July.
Okay, great. Anyway, I worked with Kirk. He was my first director, and I was starting to feel like I was feeling my moxie. I was I think I got the hang of this. I think I can do this. And I said, you know, I'm trying, Kirk. I'm trying to get better, and you know, hopefully I'm doing good. And he looked at me and goes, oh yeah, you're great when the mask is down. Yeah, absolutely. And I was like, which means that like almost half of every episode that Iron Man's in, he's Tony, he's not Iron Man. So I still had all that lip flap matching to do, and he was just being honest. Like, I'm great when I didn't have to match the flap, but I was still growing in matching the flap. And now I can say I'm better at matching flap. I still get a little helping hand from the engineer, I'm sure, but most dubbing actors do. It's really a hard skill set. You've got to match somebody else's performance. You've got to, because we are so persnickety, we're more persnickety than the original creators of the content. It is very meticulous work. And I take my hat off, at least metaphorically, symbolically, to those who do it for a living. I do some of it, and I'm still active, but the people who are really doing it as their bread and butter, like, these are people with a skill set that is really impressive, super impressive.
Yeah, one of my first interviews this time last year was Wendy Lee.
Oh my gosh, yes. And Wendy was one of my first directors on localized Japanese role-playing games. So she's a wonderful director, but yeah, as I'm sure you well know from your interview, she's an astounding talent. Yeah. I mean, the things she can do with her voice and the way she can portray a character, so compelling. So compelling.
I did a while ago, I did talk to Jeff Nimoy too. I know that he directed you in Ultraman.
Yes, he did. Jeff's a character. Let me tell you that much. Working with Jeff is, it's not for the faint at heart. Not because he's a bad guy or he's a jerk or anything. He's actually a great guy. And it's just that he's so into the process of having fun and kicking it old school in the booth that, like, you better have your party pants on, because Jeff's gonna make that session a good time. Ultraman was one of my favorite projects to have dubbed. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for doing, again, the deep dive on some of these projects, Chris. Oh, yeah. People ask me all the time about Kung Fu Panda. I'm getting more and more questions about Iron Man and What If and some of these big profile projects. But, like, one of my favorite projects to do was Ultraman, and it was a dubbing gig. It was one of my favorite because the animation was so spectacular, but also I got to play mentor to an actor buddy of mine who I was mentoring at the time. Gunnar Sizemore plays Ultraman Ace in that, and I got to play Yapul, who is basically his caretaker, caregiver, technician, mechanic guy. Yeah. And it was really fun to play basically a character who talked like this and was, pretty low key. I pictured him as like a Sam Elliott cowboy type. So I really tried to give him this, like, what are you thinking? Kind of this down-to-earth, gritty feel to him. And that project was just a sweet spot to be able to work with, again, somebody I was coaching and mentoring at the time, and just go, wow, we're both in the same project, and it's kind of high profile, and it's super cool animation, and it just feels like appropriate and right. So, yeah, that was one of my favorite projects. Yeah, Poole is a great character to play, to just dive into, because he also gets the big exposition about, like, who's on whose side. Like, at the end, he's the one that, like, reveals all the secrets. And yeah, Poole's probably is the big, like, okay, I'll tell you kind of moment.
And so how'd you become involved with Fire Emblem?
Oh, Fire Emblem. So here's something that some folks may or may not have ever talked about in terms of being in the industry. But when you start working with clients on a regular basis, you find certain clients you will always say yes to. And the studio that had the contract for that mobile game were definitely those kinds of clients for me. The name of the studio is Cup of Tea Productions, and if Cup of Tea calls, I always answer. If they say if they've got an audition for me, I always say what time and when and how soon do you need it, and let's work together some more, because they have great people. And for Fire Emblem, I believe it was an audition out of the booth. What they were looking for was, because again, the mobile game takes characters from the entire franchise, from all the different realms and worlds, and and nations that are represented in the Fire Emblem franchise at large, and puts them all together in this mobile format, and you can build teams. Liam O'Brien, who had voiced the character of Laszlo originally in the original like JRPG game, was for one reason or another unavailable to do it for the mobile game. And so they were looking for a voice match. They wanted someone who could still do that kind of, like upper crust British refined sound for Laszlo, because he's a very refined guy. And, honestly, I think I was good enough.
Okay.
Not that I was a spot-on voice match for Liam, but I know that I captured the essence of that character in terms of my portrayal. So I think they were happy to give that to me. And then as I got in, they had me do a couple of little ancillary things, saw my range, and then all of a sudden I'm 5 characters in this thing, right? I'm Arden talking like this, right? And I'm Joel talking like that, and Abel, and I'm I'm Inigo, the younger version of Laszlo, kind of like this. So he's a dancer, so he's very light in his voice, just as he's light on his feet. And Laszlo is, of course, the more mature and refined version of that same character, like that. And that's been super fun. And every once in a while, excuse me, they will release some DLC or some updated content where there'll be a new skin available for a character. I think a couple of springs ago, Inigo had a new spring costume that came with its own couple of lines. And so they'll bring me back in and come do Inigo for us and come do Laszlo for us every once in a while. But that's how I got involved. It was an out-of-the-booth audition. They were looking for a voice match. And that's always, when it's another actor that is still working today that isn't a celebrity, like if you're voice matching or you're being asked to voice match a currently working blue-collar actor like yourself, at least for me, the first thing I ask is, well, why isn't this other person doing this role?
Yeah.
Because of situations that you may have heard about over the years that happen with big shows like The Simpsons or Family Guy or what have you, where the Simpsons cast wants more money and Fox doesn't want to pay them more money. And so they threaten to walk out, and Fox says, fine, we'll replace you. And they send out audition sides for all the Simpsons characters, and everybody sits on their hands and nobody auditions for them, because they all know, like if the roles were reversed, I would not want somebody working against me getting my payday that I believe I have earned by underbidding me and taking my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always super sensitive to that. There are times where I've had characters that I know friends of mine are doing, and I will call them first and go, I just got sides for this character. Did you know those are going around? And in this case, I asked the studio, because I trust the team at Cup of Tea. So I didn't have to ask Liam directly, but I said, what happened to the actor who played this originally? Why are you looking for a voice match? And I don't want to be taking anybody's job in any way, shape, or form. And they're like, oh, no. He already passed on it. He's too busy, or he's too this. I don't even remember. It was years ago. But whatever reason he passed, we just need somebody to replace it now. He's okay. Everybody's okay. No, there's no bad blood. I'm like, okay, let's do this. But that is a very real consideration. I think that's what makes the voiceover community, in terms of a body of actors and professionals, or rather a body of actors and creatives, so different from the on-camera world, where it really is dog eat dog. And it really is, your loss can be my gain if I work it the right way.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more harsh of an environment, chew you up, spit you out environment. Whereas most everybody who has come into the voiceover community, at least in the last decade and a half, will tell you the most warm, open, beautiful body of people. They're so encouraging. They're so loving. And it's true. That's definitely been my experience.
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about Kung Fu Panda at length. In fact, I'd no skin off my nose if we don't. But what I will say is, I wouldn't have even had the opportunity to do that voice match if it weren't for James Arnold Taylor basically saying, I don't do that voice match, but you know what? You should call Mick Wingert's agent, because he does.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't actually, but he had enough faith in my skill and how much I sounded like Jack already, that he was warm and welcoming and was a friend. Like, I'm indebted to him for that. Yeah. Whereas if this is on the on-camera world, someone would be like, no, I can do it. I got it. I need the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a different, there's just a different ethos. I guess it has something to do with your face being recognized in the fame and all that stuff. Like the stakes are much lower. The level of fame I'm achieving is so much lower than any on-camera talent trying to, you know, make themselves a star. So, so it costs less. It costs less for me to be a nice guy. Like, yeah, sure, take that guy. If I don't book it, I want you to book it. I constantly coach people on auditions for stuff that I'm going out for myself. And I see how that can be a conflict of interest, but honestly, when I'm coaching them, I'm thinking, how do I get you this role? How do I help you book this? And sometimes if I know the talent that should book this is sitting in front of me, I won't even submit. I'll have gotten the audition, but I'll have worked with talent A on it and be like, no, who they want is talent A. And I don't need to muddy the waters with my audition because it really should go to this guy. He needs it, not because it's perfect for him. And that's just, you know, I guess that's a privilege of being in this kind of a workspace and headspace community where you do get to encourage one another, and it isn't all about how many influencer followers you have and all that stuff.
I think probably my personal favorite anime role of yours is Lovecraft in Bungo Stray Dogs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a short but sweet one because as a horror fan, I knew who H.P. Lovecraft is, but also, I mean, his whole shtick is so funny. First of all, they pair him with Steinbeck, John Steinbeck.
Yeah.
And Steinbeck is this like young, plucky 1930s farm worker guy. And he's got all the energy, and Lovecraft is just like, I'm so tired. And it just gets to be this awesome counterpoint. That was one of my favorites as well. Thank you for saying that. Playing Lovecraft was super fun, and the director Susie Goldish and I had a really fun time of putting that together for Bungo. I wish he had more episodes, cause I mean, yes, for the work, but also what a great characterization. His big, long, gothic hair and his tattered trench coat, so cool. He also has, spoiler alert, for those of you who have not watched, I guess it's the second season of Bungo Stray Dogs, when they introduced the American Authors Gang, I can say this, spoiler alert, turn off your interview now, tick tock, tick tock. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it. He also has one of the best endings of any of the characters in that show.
Yeah.
His final moment is gangbusters.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate that. I love playing H.P. Lovecraft. I would say in terms of anime, I've gotten to do some really fun stuff on Baki. Those shows are ridiculous. I mean, it's just this side of Bara. It really is. Like the musculature of these guys and like there's zero body fat on any of them, and they're all like distorted, huge characters. I can't remember the name. Maybe you'll know the name of the character, but the Chinese kung fu master that basically holds the tournament in like the final season.
Kaku,
yeah. Kaku's so much fun to play, and Stridum's super fun to play too. Because he's always got that stogie in his mouth. So literally, I was doing the whole thing like this, as though I was holding a stogie in my mouth. You cheat it a little bit so that there's always clarity to the words that you're saying. But literally, I was trying to emulate the sound of what it would sound like if I was holding a large cigar in my jaw while I was trying to talk. And then in Baki Hanma, he gets some, which is the new series on Netflix right now. He gets some episodes where he's taken the stogie out and he gets to have some honest dialogue that's a little more like that. And that's fun. I think that's a good time. Baki's super fun. I knew, like, when I do conventions and appearances, the con will usually make some sort of banner or even just social media digital art to promote the appearance. And I always know when they've done a deep dive if I see characters from Baki on the poster. They know who I am. Anybody can put Poe from Legends of Awesomeness on a poster, right? Everybody gets that one. That's a freebie. Yeah. But if you could put H.P. Lovecraft on the poster. I know you really wanted me at this convention.
Mm-hmm. Or even Cain and Sacred Beasts.
Oh yeah. Sacred Beast. I love playing the villain.
Mm-hmm.
I love playing the villain. I always have. I was a very kind of like imaginative play kind of child. Lots of make believe. There wasn't a towel, trench coat, bed sheets, curtain in my house that didn't become a cape. No curtain rod, no broom handle that didn't become a wizard staff. And like I was just very into fantasy when I was a little kid. Kids that I associated with were always like fighting who was going to play the hero. Whether we were playing with action figures or we were doing imaginative play, just like dress up and make believe, like they were always wanting to be the hero. And I'm like, oh no, I want to be Darth Vader. What are you talking about? I want to be Luke Skywalker. He's a whiner. I want to be Darth Vader. And like I was way into the villains. So Cain is not the first villain that I've ever played, but I will say it's the most significant mastermind villain I've played to date. And I played that before I played Buena Festa on One Piece Stampede, who's also a mastermind, another one of my favorite roles. But the great thing about Cain is he's that loquacious type. He will just talk and talk and talk. And he's everything that's delicious about playing a villain. He's kind of he has that ridiculous hat, that wide-brimmed top hat thing that he wears is ridiculous. But aside from that, he's everything that's great. He's got the long mane. He's a supernatural vampire creature. He starts his whole story arc by betraying his best friend. Like, he's just a classic villain. And so in some ways, when I booked that role, and that was another one I actually booked on audition, sometimes a studio like Cup of Tea or Studiopolis, who's a local studio here in Los Angeles that deals with a lot of dubbing, they'll have me on their roster, and they'll bring me in for things like Zozo Zombie, Dino Girl Galco, where they just know, like, we didn't have you audition for some of these roles, but we know you can cover them, and we just need someone to come in that we can trust that will make this sound good. We're not auditioning, we're just calling on our regulars. And that's a great place to be in. I am so thankful for that kind of work. And it's always nice to book something in your own right. It's always nice to go, yes, I nailed that. Because there's that feeling of accomplishment when you get in and audition for a role and all of a sudden, you know, they're calling you back and going, guess what? You got it. And Cain was one of those where I knew exactly from having watched my share of anime what an anime mastermind villain should sound like. And so I gave them one of those where he was very haughty like that. And I want to say the audition sides were, at least in part, they were basically his lecturing monologue that takes place at his big like gala party that he gives.
Yeah.
Which is all I will say about that for spoilers and other reasons. But he has this speech at this party. He like gets up on the staircase and addresses the whole party crowd. And that was part of the speech. And I'm like, I know how this should be done. I know what he's done. I know what this is about. I've seen this. So it was fun to book that.
So outside of what you've mentioned, like in terms of your most recent roles, is there anything else that you can safely talk about, or is it mostly NDA?
I can say that I'm involved with Bat Wheels, which is super fun. Bat Wheels is a cool project coming to you next year for the preschool set, but it's the first time that Batman and the kind of whole Gotham cadre of characters is being presented specifically for a preschool crowd. It's kind of like, I always liken it to, and I hope that the people at Warner Brothers don't slap my hand for this, but the easiest metaphor to describe the show is like Batman meets the world of Cars.
Okay.
Where the cars have come to life and have their own personalities and that kind of thing. And I know I'm not violating NDA saying that and describing it that way, because there's previs that has been released. There's cast announcements. I think it's public knowledge that Ethan Hawke is our Batman.
Oh.
Because preschoolers really care about celeb involvement. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I can't wait to work with him, and I'm part of the core cast of that, and that's super fun. That's something I can talk about. I can talk about the Hidden Frequencies, which is my own horror podcast. It's an anthology of audio dramas. We started in 2018, and then in 2019 we started doing live shows at conventions and appearances, and we would record them live and then release them later. And then 2020 hit, and all of a sudden the pandemic kind of killed the convention scene. So we've been resurrecting the 2018 content. We've been reposting them to our podcast feed, polished up the original episodes, given some new act breaks, told the same stories with the same performances, but we're including little clues here and there. There's a larger story going on now with these intertwined episodes. And we're almost done with that, and then we're going to release some brand new material. So we're still working on that. I just took script submissions last February for scripts to be considered for inclusion, and I think we've got like 10 to 12 really solid options for production. And that's something I can definitely talk about. I can also say that Arcane has been renewed for a season 2.
Okay.
I cannot speak to whether or not the professor is going to be involved in that,
Whether or not you're going to see more of Heimerdinger, but I can tell you, it's as likely as any other character.
and I'm super excited about that. It's been really interesting because both What If and Arcane were shows that I worked on in 2019 that then got pushed 2018 to 2019, and then they got pushed because of the pandemic. So them both releasing this summer for What If, and then this fall for Arcane, it's like 2 years in the making, and it's so fun to have these really high profile projects now. And people are like, can I interview you on my podcast? Can I interview you for my YouTube channel? I'm like, well, fame has its perks, I guess. But yeah, it's fun to see this work that I had put in so much heart to a couple of years ago come to fruition. And I have to say, I'm always proud of the work that I'm involved with. I'm proud of every show in different ways, whether it's Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness or Paws of Destiny, or if it's Mass Effect 2 or Kessen 3. Like, I'm always proud to be a part of these creative endeavors. And there's a certain special pride that I have for What If and for Arcane, because Arcane is just so wonderfully well received. Same for What If, and with What If, I can honestly say I've officially joined the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is pretty flippin' awesome. Not a lot of people get to do that. In fact, I got there before Jack Black did. So, now I am picking up the role from another actor. I probably do a middling job filling his shoes. It was kind of an impossible task, but in terms of what's coming up, what's next, what I will say about What If is they have gone on record now publicly saying that there is a lost episode that basically didn't get through the production pipeline in time that would have filled in more of the Gamora story before the series finale. And that is a Tony Stark story, and that is, as far as I know, still my performance in it, unless they replace me. But at this point, I'm looking forward to seeing that just like everybody else in season 2, hopefully. I think there's talk that they are going to release it as part of season 2, as like a prequel story or something. I don't know, but it's exciting. There's that to look forward to, and more Arcane to come, and that kind of thing.
So my final question is always asking, what do you want your legacy to be?
What do I want my legacy to be? That's a really deep question, Chris. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I mean, since I've started doing this, I've already helped people in ways that I wouldn't have expected. There's this autistic kid named Sebastian who wants to start doing interviews like I did, and he always makes a point of telling people when he interviews them that it's because of me, and that's something I never would have thought of.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
that is a profound legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to sound to overstate things. I think we have a real tendency to overstate the sentimental in our day and age. That whole live, laugh, love vibe, and every little thing matters. And it's not that I want to demean that either, but I want people to take me seriously when I say, like, you impacting one life that significantly is a hell of a legacy.
Yeah.
So when you ask me, like, what do I want my legacy to be? I think in media, there's always going to be fans of my work and detractors of my work. Like the first comment I got on Instagram when my episodes aired as I was Tony Stark on What If was, please don't ruin Iron Man. Please leave Iron Man alone. You already ruined Kung Fu Panda. Like, there's always going to be those people who are like, you suck, dude, whatever. I hope that my legacy is reflected in the generation of voice actors that I'm helping to train. I hope that my legacy is in the family and relationships that I've left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationships in the industry that I've left behind. There've been several losses over these last 2 years through COVID and other extenuating circumstances of people in the acting community. And Chris Ayers is one of them, I want to say. Chris Ayers, who did a lot of work for Funimation. I did not know Chris. I did not know him very well at all. In fact, I may have met him once, if at all. I may not have ever met him.
Okay.
And I will say the outpouring I saw in social media from people who had worked with him was so touching. The fact that his legacy is the grace and the humor and the love that he showed to his fellow performers, to his collaborators behind the glass, to being the kind of person he is, or was, I should say. And that was a huge impact, that people were pouring themselves out on social media saying, I don't know what my life is going to be like without Chris Ayers in my life anymore.
Yeah.
He was a huge bright light in this industry for me. People saying the same thing of Brad Venable. And these are very untimely passings. And I would hope, I would want my legacy to be something like that, more than, damn, he did a good Jack Black. Boy, there was nobody better at doing Jack Black than that Mick Wingert. I'll tell you what. I love that compliment. I do get that compliment. I love having that as part of my body of work. But I think I want my legacy to be, we loved working with him, and he was such a bright light, and he was always encouraging. Yeah, just thinking about that makes me a little emotional, thinking about the loss of Chris, whom I didn't know, but who I see the impact of in my colleagues and my peers and the people who did know him. Same thing with Brad, the people who knew and loved Brad in a way that I never got the privilege of doing. I did know Brad, but not to the degree that some of the people have felt this loss.
Yeah.
And to be able to see how that loss has impacted the community at large, that would be more than I could ever ask as a legacy.
Well, thanks. I'm glad that we got to do this.
Me too. Chris, thanks so much for the interview. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and yeah, please stay in touch. Pleasure chatting with you, and I hope to talk to you again.
You as well. Thanks.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
See ya.